alpaca, gibbon, meerkat, hippopotamus, baboon, walrus. Odd Taxi is the latest animated series featuring anthropomorphic animal characters, having just aired this past spring season. However, unlike its contemporaries, the various animal species of each character are rarely referenced directly, and it also doesn't seem to reflect their place in society in any meaningful way. For example, in Beastars, every character's place in society is designated by whether they are herbivorous or carnivorous. Similarly, Zootopia directly acknowledges species and their physical capabilities, while also addressing that society had evolved to phase out the wild beast aspect of their animal ancestors. BoJack Horseman may be the closest comparison, as usually animal characters are addressed in the same manner as human characters, but there are deviations in that even, such as in aquatic and flying animals. And of course, there is that very distressing chicken episode. But in Odd Taxi's case, everything but the characters being animals seems to run parallel to our own world. It very much takes place in modern Tokyo, it being referenced that it takes place in 2021 even. To quickly summarize the show, it follows a 41-year-old taxi driver named Odokawa, and the events surrounding the various passengers he picks up on his shifts. Also, he's a walrus. Well, there's a lot more to it than that. Such a good portion of the show is us sitting in unusually calm conversations between Odokawa and his passengers. But the show isn't exclusive to taxi dialogue. There is a wider mystery at play, and piecing together how each passenger is connected to it is one of the many compelling aspects of the show. And Odokawa, while being somehow involved with all of the mystery, is hardly the only character focused on. The show has a rich and developed cast, with some characters being given full episodes in the show's short 13-episode time span, and I think it's by looking at the approach to character that we can see why the show has seemed to have already earned a cult status a mere couple months after finishing airing. To further prove its growing cult status, we need look no further than one of Odd Taxi's most cited comparisons, Pulp Fiction. I think it would be fair to say that it takes a lot of inspiration from the film. Both are crime dramas that play with convention by swapping both character focus and even time periods. While each has a direct timeline that is followed, both often stray by following characters and events that happen before, during, and after the main sequence. This makes all of the connections between the characters deeper and more interesting, as if even the smallest mistakes or choices can have adverse effects on other characters down the line. And while I love Pulp Fiction as much as anyone else, it wasn't the first film that came to mind when watching Odd Taxi. Rather, I found myself often thinking of another film, Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia. To those unfamiliar with Magnolia, it managed to be both an opus about what it is to be human, and a slice of life following the little moments of around a dozen characters. Perhaps this can be better understood when you realize the film features a 3-hour runtime, albeit a very quick 3 hours, I must say. The film bounces so often from each character and plot that it hardly ever has time to be boring. Similar to Odd Taxi, figuring out how seemingly unrelated characters are connected to others much further on is one of the rewarding aspects of watching it. To actually summarize the events of the film would take far, far too long. So maybe I'll save that for a deep dive at a later date, as I do adore it. And I won't be spoiling anything directly here, as the scene I'll be discussing in length is literally the opening moment of the film. I will, however, be discussing some of the themes explored in the film, so if you'd like to have a blind watch, I'd wholly recommend seeking it out yourself, as it is well worth it. Similar deal for ODDTAXI. For now, I will be discussing an early episode, with a stronger spoiler warning given later, in which I'll more widely discuss the show, including its ending. What I do want to focus on here is how I think the two connect to one another. Both had me reflecting on perspective and purpose in a way I hardly expected before jumping into either. Magnolia plays around a lot with the idea of coincidences, and how little events in one person's life can result in much more profound moments in another's life somewhere else in the world. For example, in its opening it details an event that leads to a man's attempted suicide becoming a murder instead. We see the man jump off the ledge of a building, but as he falls, he's hit from a shotgun shot out from one of the windows he passes on the way down. We then see him land in a net that had been placed at the bottom for window cleaners a few days prior. Had it not been for the shotgun, he would have survived the fall. But that's not where the coincidence ends. Turns out, the shotgun had been shot by his mother. The man's parents would often get in heated arguments that would result in one pointing the shotgun at the other. Usually, the shotgun is never loaded, as it is only used as a scare tactic in the heat of it all. But this time, the night prior, the suicidal man had had enough of the constant fighting, so he loaded the shotgun, knowing his parents would pick it up in their next fight. Following the sequence of events, it seems the man orchestrated his own murder. With that in mind, let's look at how coincidence is explored in ODDTAXI, similarly connecting characters in unexpected ways. In episode 3, Odokawa is confronted by a Yakuza member named Dobu regarding a crime he got mixed up in. Dobu threatens Odokawa to become a sort of informant for him, and Odokawa lazily refuses until Dobu goes through his phone to threaten the lives of his friends. He passes by the name Shirakawa, which garners a reaction from Odokawa, and he reluctantly agrees. Upon dropping off Dobu, Odokawa remembers he was meant to meet Shirakawa at a park in the middle of the night, so he hits the gas to rush and check up on her, given the recent threats. On the way, while driving recklessly, he almost hits a nameless character we haven't seen yet. The character jumps out of the way, dropping his phone in the process. The next episode then switches focus onto the backstory of this unknown character, a 24-year-old puma named Tanaka. Tanaka narrates the episode as we follow from grade school. He reflects on how in school there was a hierarchy formed around rare erasers among his classmates. Tanaka had always felt like a loser, but found worth in himself when he acquired a rare eraser of a dodo, doubly so as he has a deep affection for birds. Yes, actual non-anthro animals exist in this world too. Elementary school is cruel though, and he quickly dropped in the hierarchy when a classmate had even cooler erasers. This led him to seek out an eraser online owned by a user named Ditch11 that was a literal one of a kind, being the only one made in the world. He stole his parents' credit card and began bidding on it secretly at night. He mistakenly bid 10,000 yen, around 90 USD, expecting to be outbid, but was shocked to see he won. His father beat him for using his card, and all he could do was wait for the eraser to come in. And as the weeks and months pass, nothing arrives. The horrors of no refund cross his mind as he takes his loss. We flash forward to Tanaka as an adult, working as a programmer at a gaming company. While there, he begins playing a phone game about raising your own zoo. The game works similar to a gacha, spending money to roll on acquiring rare and endangered species to add to your zoo. He picks up this game as one of the more rare roles is a dodo, and perhaps as a reckoning for his childhood, he sets his sights on acquiring the bird. This reaches an obsession when he glances at the world ranking and sees the player holding the top has the username Ditch11. The same as the owner of the eraser all those years ago. He begins to live only for the game, losing track of work and his overall hygiene as he stays glued to his phone trying to roll the dodo and outrank Ditch 11. We see Tanaka's life crumble around him in pursuit of this digital bird. This brings us back to Odokawa. Late one night, Tanaka is walking while continuing his process of rolling for the dodo in the game. And this time, he gets it. He cries in exasperation, feeling actualized now and that all of his life had meant something up to this point. Then, a familiar taxi comes rushing around the corner and Tanaka dodges it, his phone flying into the air before dropping into a puddle. He brings it to get repaired, but the damage is done. The dodo was gone. He comes back home defeated and finds his beloved pet cockatiel had passed while he was out, further deteriorating his mental state. He goes to bury it in the park, and in the spot where he digs, he finds a small box containing a gun. He takes it and swears revenge on the taxi driver. There's more to this series of coincidences, such as where this gun came from, and the fact that Odokawa actually happens to be in possession of the rare eraser Tanaka was seeking out earlier. But we'll get to that later in the spoiler section. I referenced these two aspects of both Magnolia and ODDTAXI for a reason though, as while both play along with the idea of coincidences, I feel that both actually result in an anti-coincidence sentiment. Okay, why would I spend so much time explaining two moments of coincidence if I was just going to 180 on it anyways? Well, for the same reason each piece decided to use them in their runtime themselves. And to go into why that is, I'll need to actually spoil ODDTAXI. So I'd implore you to go check out the show before watching this next section, as like Magnolia, it's worth the watch, and the conclusions that you will no doubt reach on your own as well. I hope that what I've shared above was enough to spur some interest for you. If you're into crime drama, chill television, and the occasional philosophical debate between animals, you will love the show. If you don't feel like doing so, you're still welcome to join us, but you have been warned. Okay, what a show, am I right? Now, what was I doing rambling on about coincidences when I aimed to disprove their significance to the show? In Magnolia, the film is much more centered on the thesis of coincidences not being important, and that the real importance belongs to the people around them. ODDTAXI is more subtle about outwardly expressing this, but all the more clear with visual metaphors. The connection between Odokawa and Tanaka continues throughout the show. Tanaka is constantly hunting Odokawa while he goes about his business. This boils to a head in a confrontation in a parking lot while Odokawa and Dobu are executing a bank robbery. Tanaka confronts them and points the gun at them. The gun just so happens to be Dobu's that he buried to hide earlier, and so he knew that Tanaka had fired the only 5 bullets in the cylinder earlier and would now be empty. While the scene heats up, the eraser falls out of Odokawa's front pocket. Tanaka picks it up and realizes what it is. This seems to be going in a direction of mercy for the players involved. But after some discussion, Tanaka discovers that Dobu was the original owner of the eraser, that he had been the user Ditch 11 all those years earlier. He promptly shoots the gun, and to Dobu's surprise, he is hit with a shot in the side. Tanaka screams in horror and flees the scene. If you've watched the show, you know this isn't the only case of weird connection between the characters. There's the idol group's connection to both the Yakuza and Odokawa's friend Kakihana, or the comedy duo's connection to the idol group, and also Shirakawa's connection to Dobu and thus back to Odokawa. The list goes on. The show takes time to show everyone's place and personal history with each other. The events may be coincidental, but to each character it is a major event in the story that is their lives. Nothing is too small on an individual scale. This brings us to the point of this video and what I believe is proof of the real depth of ODDTAXI. This is also the real no turning back now spoiler for the show. Throughout the 13 episodes, there are only a few allusions to the characters being animals. All of these allusions come from Odokawa himself. Early on in the show, Odokawa's doctor Goriki asks him what he sees him as, to which he replies, "A gorilla." Goriki laughs. Later, Shirakawa asks why Odokawa is able to remember her so clearly. "You're the only alpaca around." From an early point, it's implied that only Odokawa sees everyone as animals. This concludes with Odokawa's mysterious past surrounding his parents. While the events of the show play out, we occasionally come back to Goriki on his own venture to find out the truth of Odokawa's past to better understand him. This leads him to eventually discovering that Odokawa's parents had died in a car accident which he was also involved in. Before said accident, Odokawa was a troubled kid. He could never relate with others, as the kids at school teased him, calling him a walrus among other things because he was chubby, I guess. At home, his father would either always be drunk or away with his mistress, while his mother would stay at home and overeat and drink herself, and beat Odokawa. He remarks that she too is like a walrus. Odokawa loves animals because his father gifted him an animal encyclopedia that he would spend every night reading. One day, Odokawa's father left him at the zoo so that he could go visit his mistress elsewhere. Odokawa ends up absolutely loving it there. He remarks on how he couldn't look people in the eye, but he could stare at animals all day. He finds a walrus and develops a kinship with it. It reminds him of himself and his mother. One night, Odokawa's mother took his drunk and passed out father and himself for a night drive. This would result in the accident that I mentioned earlier, and only Odokawa would survive. When he woke up, he began to see everyone as animals, and himself as a walrus. He said people felt bad for him, but he felt great because now he could communicate with others as they were not people, but animals. He couldn't look at people in the eye, but he could stare at animals all day. I won't speak on the psychology of this, as I am no professional, so I can't speak on whether a brain injury could result in this kind of condition. I won't be exploring it medically so as not to be dismissive of any real-world counterparts that may exist, but its portrayal in the show has significance in the themes I want to explore here. Before this is revealed in the last episode, it's implied throughout that Odokawa is abnormally skilled at picking out faces in a crowd, as long as he had time to get to know the person in some capacity. This clearly must be a result of Odokawa's brain applying an animal to a person after meeting them, seeing them as said animal from then on out. This has a literal place in the narrative of the show, as this ability aids him a lot in the many oddities that occur, and I think it also says something about the individuality of people. Yeah, Odokawa lived through tragedies, but ultimately left it with a better mechanism to relate with people. And the way he relates with them is by subconsciously assigning an animal to them, of which every person's individual quirks shape what animal they are perceived as. And maybe I'm reaching a little bit here, but I think this is analogous to the themes we were discussing above. While we are all one of many faces in the crowd, there are still very specific things that make us, us. There are no small or big players in life, there are only people, each with their own experience specific to them that shapes them. And sometimes these experiences reach to others' experiences, but that doesn't diminish its importance to themselves. And sometimes these experiences can seem so randomly generated that they appear as coincidences. But when looked at on a larger scale, that isn't the case. One person we've never met may have made a little choice that was important to them. And somewhere down the line, that little choice resulted in something bigger happening to us. And that something bigger may seem to belong to us, but somewhere before, it belonged to someone else. So it's not our coincidence, it's their moment. And ours. In the ending montage of the show, we get a glimpse of human forms of each of the characters. Odokawa has another convenient accident that allows him to once again see the world as it is. And through him, we see how he interpreted each character as their assigned animal. Things like the way they style their hair, the way they carry themselves, or the way they smile, all had an individual effect on what makes them into the person/animal that they are. Every little detail mattered, just like really every little person did themselves.